C-SPAN is brought to you by your cable or satellite provider.
Journal continues.
Alex Nowrasteh joins us now. He works as an immigration policy analyst at the Cato Institute here in Washington, D.C., joining us this morning after the Trump administration last week cited the thousands of, quote, special interest aliens encountered at the southern border as a reason for the need for the border wall. So first, explain how one gets classified as a special interest alien and what that means.
So there's basically two characteristics that determine that of the individual traveler that comes to the border. The first is whether they're from a country that has been designated as a origin point for special interest aliens. These are countries that are determined by Department of Homeland Security in consultation with intelligence agencies to determine which countries are more likely to send or produce terrorist threats against the United States. The second is based on the travel patterns of the individual involved. Now, as far as we can tell by our analysis, and the government doesn't make clear what these travel patterns specifically are. Basically, if you're not able to get a visa to come to the U.S. directly, but you get a visa or some other way you go to Central America and then you make it up to the border and you're from one of those countries, that's, as far as we can tell, good enough to get on a list as a designated special interest alien.
So explain special interest alien vis-a-vis terror watch list.
So they're not the same. There are known and suspected terrorists. Those are on terrorist watch lists. Those are for individuals who are suspected of or known to be terrorists or involved in terrorist organizations and fundraising, recruitment, or actually fighters involved in those organizations. A special interest alien is just somebody from one of those countries or a country that has produced some terrorism or a country that U.S. intelligence agencies think could produce terrorism going forward or some point in the future, and then they come up to the U.S. border. So they're not really the same, although somebody can clearly be a known and suspected terrorist and from a special and a country designated as a source for special interest aliens.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen last week in USA Today had a column on the humanitarian and security crisis that the U.S. is facing at the border. She said last year DHS encountered more than 3,000 special interest aliens, individuals with suspicious travel patterns who may pose a national security risk, or people who are from countries with ties to terrorism at our southern border. How many of those who have been classified as special interest aliens have gone on to commit terrorist actions, been arrested for attempted terrorism in the United States?
So there have been, as far back, if you extend this list backwards in time to 1975 to get like the most comprehensive list possible and include and bring it up to 2017 and include any country that has ever been on this list, because usually there are countries that are put on the list and then brought off of it. So there's 63 total countries that have ever been on it. If you take a look at that and you take a look at people who have crossed the border or come up to the border and entered the United States, there have been a total of 0 terrorist attacks committed on U.S. soil by a special interest alien who was a border crosser. There have been 0 people who have been murdered or injured in any of those non-existent attacks. There have been people who have been arrested for planning such attacks on the U.S. border, inside the United States. But they have, there were a total of 7 who entered illegally, who were special interest alien countries during that time period, who have been convicted of planning a terrorist attack on U.S. soil, but none of them have really come through the U.S. border. With Mexico, they've all entered either through Canada or jumped ship in the United States.
Alex Nowrasteh with us till the bottom of the hour. We're talking about some of the statistics surrounding illegal immigration in the United States, some of these issues that have come up, especially when it comes to crime rates in the United States, and this special interest aliens is the reason why we're having this segment. If you want to join in, Democrats can call in at 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002 as we're talking about this issue of terrorism. I want to go back to your column from mid-December in the New York Daily News. Trump's wall will not stop terrorism. Why?
So the main reason is that terrorists who come from abroad and mean to do harm in the United States do not cross the southern border to do so to commit their attacks. When we take a look at the patterns of terrorist travel to the United States, they overwhelmingly use legal means to come into the United States, usually tourist visas or some other temporary visa to gain entry to the United States. Coming illegally to the United States, crossing the southern border unlawfully, is very risky. It's very dangerous. We're at about over 16,000 Border Patrol agents on the southwest border. There are fewer border crossings by Mexicans and others that they can hide amongst. and it's just not an effective way to come here to commit terrorism while there are other means to do so.
What about crime rates in general when it comes to those who cross the border illegally? President Trump with a tweet late yesterday evening, saying that the Trump portrait of an unstable border crisis is dead on, saying in the last 2 years, ICE officers made 266,000 of arrests of aliens with criminal records, including those charged or convicted of 100,000 assaults, 30,000 sex crimes, 4,000 violent killings. America's southern border is eventually going to be militarized and defended, or the United States as we know it is going to cease to exist.
So there's a lot of problems with the numbers that he put out there. When he talks about people who have been arrested by ICE, those are also people who have been released from prison. So you're talking about people who are convicted of homicide over many, many decades who are then released in that year and then deported from the United States. More importantly, when you compare the crime rates, especially for crimes like homicide, but just across the board, of illegal immigrants versus native-born Americans, in the one state where we have data for this, which is the state of Texas, we find that illegal immigrants are about half as likely in any given year to be convicted of a crime in that state than a native-born American is. When it comes to the crime of homicide, they're about 16% less likely to be convicted of a crime than a native-born American, and that's controlling for the size of the population. That's per 100,000 of the population of both illegal immigrants compared to that of natives.
When we talk about these crime rates and some of the stats you're citing, can you just say where you get these numbers from and what you base your interpretations on?
So the worst thing about this entire debate is that there's not a whole lot of great statistics on illegal immigrant crime in the United States. 49 states do not track this at all. The federal government doesn't track it, but the state of Texas does. It's the only state in the United States that does, so I get this data from the Department of Public Safety in the state of Texas. I filed numerous requests for public information from them, and they've released that information to me that allows me to compare the crime rates for specific crimes and overall of illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, and native-born Americans. And for virtually every crime in this analysis, native-born Americans are much more likely to be convicted of a crime than illegal immigrants, but overwhelmingly legal immigrants are the least crime-prone.
And you've also looked at specific areas where there are a lot of illegal immigrants, comparing crime rates there versus other parts of the country where there are not a lot of illegal immigrants. Can you talk through that data a little bit?
Sure. So people are focusing on the border, for instance. Overwhelmingly, we took a look at the crime rates in the border counties along the United States, all 23 of them compared to the interior of the United States. What we found is that the homicide rate in those counties is about 25% below that of the rest of the United States. If the rest of the United States was as peaceful as the border counties are in terms of the homicide rate, then there'd be about 5,700 fewer homicides in the United States in 2017 relative to what there really were. So of course, there's crime on the border, there are homicides on the border, there are lots of different crimes that occur there, but compared to the rest of the country, it's more peaceful than people give it credit for.
The Cato Institute, cato.org. Remind people what the Cato Institute does.
So the Cato Institute is a libertarian think tank based here in Washington, D.C. We research basically every single public policy issue from the perspective of support for free markets, limited government, individual liberty, and a peaceful, relatively non-interventionist foreign policy.
If you had $5.7 billion to invest in border or in solving the immigration issue at the border, how would you invest it?
The number one thing we need to do is to make it possible for people to come here legally who are lower skilled workers from Central and South America so that they don't have to come up to the border and ask for asylum or try to enter illegally or through any other means. Creating a guest worker visa program like this would channel the vast majority of these folks into the legal market, take pressure off of Border Patrol. Now, if that's not on the table, which it currently isn't right now, the number two thing I would do is to make it possible for that these folks who are being apprehended at the border, who are mostly asylum seekers, can be released into the United States with ankle bracelets, with caseworkers who can monitor them, and with other methods to make sure that they show up for their court cases so that they can file their claims, and if their claims are denied for asylum, then they can be removed.
I'll let you chat with callers with the rest of our time we have together. Ray's waiting in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Republican. Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of missed the point of him saying how many illegals were actually coming into this country every year. That's the first part of it. And second, even if a wall would prevent one American citizen from dying, wouldn't you want that wall no matter what the situation?
So in the total number of illegal immigrants who enter into the United States annually, these are based on estimates. What we have found, though, is that the numbers, the total stock of illegal immigrants in the United States is down by about a little less than 2 million over the last 11 years. We're about, according to Pew, in 2016, we had about 10.7 million illegal immigrants. It was over 12 in 2007. So the net annual inflow is actually negative during that time period. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't people entering illegally, of course, and or overstaying visas, but it does mean that there are more people leaving than coming in. Since about 2013, the estimates are from the Center for Migration Studies in New York that about 60 to 70% of new illegal immigrants who entered the United States did so legally, and they overstayed their visa. Now, in terms of the border wall, we have to think about what that money, if it could prevent one murder, you asked, isn't it worth doing? We have to think about what are the alternative uses of that money. Are there better ways to prevent murders in the United States than building a border wall? The estimates are that across the entire border that doesn't have a wall currently, it would cost somewhere around 36 to about $50 billion, sort of anywhere in that range, to build the entire wall across that border, even though most illegal immigrants are entering legally currently. If that money could be spent elsewhere, say on more police officers to prevent homicides, on ways to improve criminal justice or other sorts of techniques, I think we could save a lot more lives that way rather than building a wall along the southwest border, and that's what we should mainly consider is the best way to save American lives, not just the current way which has been proposed.
Webster, New York is next. Jane, Democrat, good morning.
Hi. I thank you for C-SPAN, and I just think that I agree with what the gentleman just said. I think that the woman just poo-pooing the $5.8 billion. I mean, these are supposed to be fiscal conservatives that are going about this, and maybe they should keep that GoFundMe thing going if they really want to pay for it and they really are behind it. Just keep it going until they get the money. And I think that they're so cavalier about that amount, and yet they wouldn't spend that on giving people health insurance that didn't have it. And instead they shove people into emergency rooms now instead of doing something about that situation.
Alex Nowrasteh.
The government does spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on providing health insurance to people in the United States, but I think the more pressing issue is you're absolutely correct. A lot of fiscal conservatives sort of throw their principles out the window when it comes to issues of border security, even though we have many fewer unlawful immigrants coming legally into the United States than we used to. I think we need to find the best way to get control of the situation, the best way to get control of the border, and that isn't building more fences or putting more Border Patrol agents there. That's allowing more of these folks to come in legally so they don't have to try to sneak in illegally, so that Border Patrol can focus on those people who are actual security threats, who are actual criminals, who actually do mean to do us harm, rather than trying to separate willing American workers from willing American employers from voluntary workers who want to come here.
Who up here on Capitol Hill do you think has been principled in this discussion?
That's a very difficult question. I think there's been a number of people in both parties who, over the years, have come to the position that we need to increase lawful immigration. I think Justin Amash, who is a representative from Michigan, Republican, has come around to this position over the years. And I think that Lindsey Graham has been mostly reasonable over the years on this issue, although he goes back and forth on this. And there's been numerous Democrats. The Democratic Party has basically changed its support from, it used to support border walls and a lot of enforcement. Now it's very skeptical of that and is generally in favor of increasing lawful immigration. But these things change quite a bit over time. We saw a realignment occur sort of in 2015 and 16 within the Republican Party. So that's where it stands currently. Who knows where it's going to stand in a couple of years.
Virginia Beach, Virginia. Anthony is an independent. Good morning.
Yes, gentlemen, good morning. Let me say this. I think this whole issue is being skirted and pushed to the side. If walls are immoral, let's tear down the walls that we present to have up. And number two, if all these people are coming in are so beneficial for us, why don't we just say just open the borders instead of going through this back and forth, to and fro? And furthermore, what are they running from? Are they running from crimes? Are they themselves the criminals? Because where we are right now is a bad situation, because if we continue this, guess what? We will not exist as a nation. And the only reason why I think that we don't have a complete status as far as where the numbers are concerned regarding what these people are doing is because it has been done by us. We are putting ourselves in danger thinking it would not happen, but let it continue and we're going to be in trouble.
So a lot of the main evidence is that these folks are coming to the United States are primarily from Central American countries. They're coming for a number of reasons. There's evidence that murder rates in these countries do influence the flow. There's work by economist Michael Clemens showing that for each additional murder, there is a pretty large increase in the number of asylum seekers from those countries coming to the United States. But there's also a lot of evidence that they're coming here for economic opportunity. A lot of them have family members in the U.S. Who can hook them up with jobs once they get here. U.S. rates of economic growth combined with job opportunities here, combined with the fact that they can enter Mexico much more easily, lawfully in many cases now, because Mexico reformed its immigration laws, as well as with the increasingly bad crime situation in Central America. I think all the main factors why they're coming here. In terms of what effect they have on U.S. crime, when they get here, the evidence is pretty clear. They are much less likely to be, illegal immigrants are less likely to be incarcerated than native-born Americans in U.S. prisons. And from the one state we have evidence for, they are less likely to be convicted of crimes once they come into the United States, and even are less likely to be arrested for these crimes, even though states like Texas with a lot of illegal immigrants have higher police clearance rates, meaning that police are just as likely or a little bit more likely to solve crimes in states with a lot of illegal immigrants than states that don't have very many.
To David in Virginia, a Democrat. Good morning.
Yeah, I'd like to point out the symbolism of this wall. You're going to have the Statue of Liberty at one end saying, give us your tired, your poor. And then you're going to have Trump's wall at the other end saying, keep out. If you're brown, keep out. If you're white, stay in. That's what this is about. Thank you.
So there is obviously a lot of symbolism with the wall. I think what a critic of that perspective would say is the Statue of Liberty is here to welcome legal immigrants to the United States. The wall is to keep out illegal immigrants. Now, that's what a critic of that perspective would say. What I would say in response to that is that it is very difficult to come to this country legally, especially if you are a low-skilled worker. It is virtually impossible. There's about 5,000 green cards a year for low-skilled workers who aren't related to Americans. There are very few guest worker visas available. If that system existed when our ancestors came here in the 19th and early 20th century, then there would have been many, many more illegal immigrants back then coming to the country than there is today. So if we want to, I agree that the wall is a bad symbol, and I love the symbol of the Statue of Liberty. I think it defines who we have been as a country in the past and who we hopefully will continue to be going forward. But the main issue here is not necessarily the symbols, but is the laws that are behind them. It is the fact that it is very difficult to come to this country lawfully, which is the main reason why we have the illegal immigration problem that we have today. You fix that law, make it possible to come here legally for more people who are lower skilled, and you're going to solve this problem.
Here's JD's take on what you've been saying this morning from Twitter. JD saying, the gentleman seems to just want to legalize the undercutting of wages of American citizens and lawful workers currently taking place by unlawful workers. Not a winning platform.
It might not be a winning political platform, but the economic evidence is pretty clear on this. The most negative study, the largest study that's been done on this, has found that immigration from 1990 to 2010, when over 30 million people came to this country, lowered the relative wages of American high school dropouts by about 1.7%. During that time period, while the wages for every other group of Americans went up. Now, it's important to note that high school American dropouts are about 9% of the American workforce. The vast majority of American workers do benefit as a result of immigration, and that is according to the most negative study by George Borjas at Harvard University against my position. There are many, many more studies that find that even low-skilled American workers who are high school dropouts actually win and have higher wages as a result of immigrants coming to this country, even low-skilled ones.
Jacksonville, Florida. Dave is next, an independent. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I've got a question, kind of, I hope this is up your alley, about the illegals that are already here. We're worried about 15,000 so-called caravan coming up. But there's estimates ranging from 11 million, and the far-right media wants to say there's over 20 million illegal immigrants already here. I don't understand a lot about this e-verification, but why is there not more discussion about that and penalizing the employers that are hiring these people? When I was working, we went to great lengths to make sure everybody was legal. If there's that many people here, there ought to be serious penalties against those companies that are hiring them. And what is the actual number?
So the estimates by demographers who take a look at this is that there's somewhere between about 10.5 to about 12.5 million illegal immigrants currently in the United States. Now, it could be a few million more than that or a few million less than that. But these are based on statistical evidence and estimates from census data. So you got to take that for what it's worth, but the professionals and the experts on this tend to agree in sort of that range of numbers. When it comes to E-Verify and other sort of proposed interior enforcement methods, E-Verify is a government system. What it's supposed to do is that when you get a job, the employer is supposed to sign on to this government system and run your identity documents, or the identity documents that you give your employer through this system to make sure that you're guaranteed and verified legal worker in the United States. Now, the problem with this system is that they check the identity documents that you give them. So let's say that I am an illegal immigrant and I'm looking for a job in the United States and I hand them your identity documents. E-Verify checks your identity documents and approves me for a job. That's the loophole in the entire system. That's why in places like Arizona, where we've seen is that the impact of E-Verify on wages is very, very small, because most illegal immigrants who know about this system get better and better fake identifications to be able to go around it and to skirt it. What's even more interesting is that states where E-Verify is mandatory for all workers, states like Arizona, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, and a few others where there are partial E-Verify mandates, basically only about half of new hires are even run through the program in these states. These states do not want to enforce an E-Verify mandate because it would be very costly and it would hurt a lot of businesses, mostly small businesses, and nobody wants to hurt small businesses if they don't have to.
On enforcement, Mary Beth on Twitter has a question when it comes to E-Verify. What are the penalties? How is it being enforced?
So they're really, the penalties depend on the state level. I mean, there is no E-Verify federal mandate. What E-Verify is a tool that allows employers to use it. Now, some federal contractors have to use E-Verify for certain federal projects, but there's not a federal mandate. So there's some states that require E-Verify to be used for all new hires. And in a lot of them, there are no penalties for not using it if you don't use it. There are penalties in a lot of them for knowing or intentionally hiring an illegal immigrant, but not for not using E-Verify. In the state of South Carolina, the government actually does do audits to make sure that people use E-Verify when they hire folks, but the penalties are usually very small. It's something like being put on a government list, and then they monitor you for a 6-month period to make sure you use E-Verify, and then you get off that list. Some of them they say, well, we're going to revoke your business licenses, but that's very rarely done. When Governor Napolitano in Arizona in 2008 signed a bill to do just that. She called it the business death penalty. It was used a total of 3 times in the state of Arizona. Since then, twice of them on businesses that were already bankrupt. So it's not really something that politicians like to use once it's in effect, but it's a good talking point.
David is next. Fairfax, Virginia, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Just a couple of quick questions. First, thank you so much to the Institute for doing this research. Even as a Republican, and even though it's a libertarian think tank, I'm curious to know all the information. I don't seem to be able to get that from standard news media on either side, so I'm very, very appreciative of that. So first question, how do you spell keto so that I can actually get online and research some of what you guys are doing? And second question, what would the Keto Institute's recommendations be for sort of fixing this this problem as a whole? It is an issue. I have many friends from many different countries, from Australia, Central America, South America, Europe, who for various reasons can't come here, have a hard time staying here. They're here legally. A few people who I know who are here illegally, but they're good people. And how do we fix this problem so that we can keep good people here in the States?
Well, first off, thank you very much for the compliment. I'm very proud to work at Cato. You can check out more of our information at cato.org. That's cato.org, and I'm also on Twitter, so you can follow me there to get information on this. When it comes to solving the legal and illegal immigration problem in the United States, there's really two things that I think are important. One, it was a need to make it a lot easier for people to come to this country legally to be able to work and live. Legal experts have said that the United States immigration law is second in complexity only to the income tax. In other words, the income tax is the only set of laws more complicated in the U.S. than the immigration system. We need to make it easier for people to come here legally, and if they're good people, if they're not a threat, to be able to stay here to work and live legally just like our ancestors did. I think if we liberalize these visas, made it easier for people who are low-skilled, mid-skilled, high-skilled, entrepreneurs, educated, low levels of education, who want to start a business, who want to work here, we need to make that easy to do, make it cheaper to do, make it so that's available to more people. We do that, then it will solve that problem dramatically. On top of that, I would say legalizing unlawful immigrants, those who are here illegally, who aren't violent or property criminals or national security threats, giving them a path to, at minimum, a work permit, preferably to a green card and eventual citizenship if they want to, is the way to solve this problem going forward.
Arlene, San Francisco, California, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I just have a comment. I think Trump has laid government workers off in order to create chaos in the country to get our focus off of his closeness to Putin. Trump is very close to the Russians. They have bought condos in his billion-dollar condos in the top floors of his buildings. And I'll take my answer off the phone. Thanks.
Alex Nowrasteh, care to comment on the Russia investigation?
I have no comments or expertise on that issue.
We'll have about 30 minutes of phones coming up in a little bit. Certainly a topic we can bring up in that discussion. Cynthia is in Steubenville, Ohio, and independent. Go ahead.
Hi. I believe that the wall simply stands as a symbol that we desire all who come into our country use the system and the processes that we require. This makes it fair for those who choose to come legally. I don't believe that it's a symbol that we don't want anyone to come into our country. It just keeps out those who are undesirable, makes them do it like everyone else who is wanting to do it legally and comes in fairly. I applaud Trump for making the efforts. I have no problem with the GoFundMe. I'm certainly a part of that. I feel that those of us who have the same idea that I have are willing, more willing than those that think that just open the borders, let everybody do what they want. And yes, eventually this country will not be owned by this country because all it takes is one or two terrorists to get in illegally, and they can, as you know, consider 9/11 or any of those. So I thank you for your time.
Cynthia, before you go, how much have you personally pledged towards the wall?
You know what? I have not made that pledge yet. I am going to research it more. When the comment was made now, I thought to myself, oh, that's right, there is a GoFundMe, and shame on me because since I'm so, interested in this, I should go for it, and I am going to. It might only be $100 now, and then at a later point, I don't have a lot of money, but I sure as heck feel the desire to have a symbol that we want everyone to come the legal process that we want into this country.
And Cynthia in Ohio.
Well, first off, none of the 9/11 hijackers entered this country illegally. They all entered legally. 18 of them entered on tourist visas. The other one came on a student visa. Some of them did overstay their status and eventually became illegal immigrants, or what would be considered illegal immigrants today, but none of them entered that way. Thus, even if the wall existed backwards in the past, it would have had no effect on these people entering the United States. The majority of illegal immigrants today, between about 60 and 70%, according to the Center for Migration Studies, enter legally and overstay their visas. A wall has no effect on that. Now, I'm not interested in the symbolism of this. That's for a lot of other people to debate and to determine what that is. But in terms of the effectiveness of the wall, it's a very expensive project. It'll cost between about $24 and $36 million per mile to build and an additional $1 million per mile to maintain each year after that. I don't think it'll be very effective at keeping illegal immigrants out of this country, especially since a lot of them, most of them, are now coming in legally and overstaying their visas. So I'm much more interested in the effectiveness of it, not in the symbolism of it.
Time for just a couple more calls. Charlotte, Houston, Texas, Republican. Go ahead.
Yes. I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. You're all a bunch of pencil pushers. If you don't even live in the areas that we are being, I live in the South, I live in the Texas. You know, I see the illegal immigration and what it's doing. I've worked with people that are here illegally, making the same amount of money as I am, and then collecting, because none of them are married. They have two last names and they use it. And you know, come on down and really see how it is. You push the pencils around and you give these little figures, but you know nothing. You truly know nothing.
Alex Nowrasteh, give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, one of the reasons I'm interested in this issue is because I grew up in Los Angeles, and right north of Los Angeles, also in Ventura County. I mean, Los Angeles and California in general has more illegal immigrants than any other urban area or any other state in the United States. I grew up with it. The farms where I used to run by in gym class in high school were full of illegal immigrants who were stooped, working in the fields, doing very difficult manual labor. I went to school with a lot of folks like that. So I do have some firsthand experience in dealing with this and in taking a look at it and taking a look at the issues. I'm not in favor of illegal immigration. I don't know anybody who is. I want it to be legal, though. I don't want to punish people who haven't committed other serious crimes just because they broke our immigration laws, which are primarily just international labor market regulations. I want to find a way to legalize these people and to make sure that we don't repeat this mess going forward. The reason, if we're going to just focus on enforcement, if we're just going to build a wall, if we're just going to have all these sort of extra Border Patrol agents, we are setting ourselves up for another surge of illegal immigration in the future, people who won't legalize. The way to fix this permanently going forward is to legalize these folks and to make it possible for immigrants to come here legally in the future to work and live just like our ancestors did.
Last call, Baltimore, Maryland. Robert, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like you to comment on how libertarian
libertarian? What about libertarians, Robert?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'd like you to comment on how libertarian views like your organization sort of dovetail with classic liberal economic policy that advocates for protectionism, which is, you know, basically in line with the labor policy that you described. I want to thank you, first of all, for even using the words immigration reform in the context of border security. I'd like to ask you how, you know, what proportion of border security actually contributes to the larger issue of immigration policy that you allude to, and also comment on how this historically in the last 20 or 30 years has grown, starting with another conservative Trump platform, and that was to get rid of NAFTA, and how, I'd like to ask you how you think NAFTA started to contribute to that boom in illegal immigration that you alluded to.
Robert, a lot there and only about a minute or two left.
The boom in illegal immigration from Mexico began in the early 1980s, more than a decade before NAFTA went into effect. Mexico had a very unstable currency and economic situation then that caused an economic collapse, that caused a surge of immigrants to the United States. Most of them came, a lot of them came illegally because there was no legal way for them to come. NAFTA, the evidence is that it increased a lot of economic growth, especially in the border regions of Mexico. So if it had any effect, it was probably to decrease illegal immigration just a little bit to the United States. But NAFTA really isn't a contributing factor. Over the last 30 years, really since the early 1980s, so almost 40 years, immigration has been a big issue in this country. We've had surges of illegal immigration, we've had legalizations, we've had massive increases in border security. There are about 6 times as many Border Patrol agents today as there were in 1986 when Reagan did his amnesty, but we have many, many more illegal immigrants. That is because we have not made it easier to come to this country legally. We have made it more difficult, and that is the #1 issue that we should be talking about if we want to solve this issue going forward.
The Cato Institute is cato.org online. You can follow Alex Nowrasteh on Twitter as well. He's an immigration policy analyst there. Always appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Up next on the Washington Journal, about 25 minutes for this question: what should be the compromise when it comes to the government shutdown? We've heard from partisans on both sides. We want to hear what deal you think could work for both sides. Give us a call. Give us your best deal. Democrats, 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. We'll get to your calls in just a minute.